This video is now in session, and race has a lot to do with congressional redistricting. So redistricting obviously happens every single decade, as we've explained in a lot of videos at this point. But redistricting is a process that the U.S. uses every single decade to reapportion the House districts to be more proportional to how the population is in that state. Because we have a bicameral Congress, one chamber of Congress is based on population, while the other one is based on equal voice for every single state. So with redistricting on the line this year, it's very likely that race will be a very big factor in redistricting, and race has always been a factor when it comes to redistricting because of how impactful race can be when it comes to which district votes for what. So we see here in this North Carolina map that was there since 1990. We saw this kind of map, which is very oddly shaped. You might think this looks very ridiculous, and you see here that this obviously violates. If this map were to be presented in the present day, it would definitely violate all the rules of redistricting, especially with this orange district right here, which is very suspicious looking because it's being split in half, which obviously that's not how districts works today, but back then they did that. You can see it's separated by 3 parts, 1, 2, and 3. And it looks very weird. But the main thing about this map is the 12th district, the magenta colored district. You can see it's very squiggly and it's a very small, it's like a very thinly stretched district. And this may look weird on its face. And you might think that, there's Charlotte, there's Durham, Greensboro, that must be because the Republicans want to capture the Democratic vote. But it's actually a little bit more complex than that. This district was put in place for the sake of packing black voters into one district. You can see here that the suburbs of Charlotte is here, and the suburbs are here, are the outer parts of Charlotte. This area is heavily black, and you can see it goes through here along this corridor, this highway corridor, which is also a place where a lot of black people live, and in North Carolina, still today it remains true. And then it goes through the outer areas of Greensboro and into Durham. It goes all the way through I-40, Interstate 40, I believe here, all the way to Durham. And this was done as an intention to get a black representative into the U.S. House of Representatives under the Voting Rights Act. And it may seem on its face that this should be constitutional under the VRA, because the main purpose of it was to get a black House of Representative member onto Congress. And that's what the Voting Rights Act was meant to do with these kinds of things. It was meant to promote minorities into Congress. Except this map was ruled unconstitutional because it went too far with racial gerrymandering. And what racial gerrymandering is it's kind of like partisan gerrymandering where we see today, which is that you pack and crack minority voters for in a way that goes beyond what the VRA wants, which is to have minority representation in Congress, and to a point where it's strictly about gerrymandering and about trying to capture a minority vote for political gain. And that was what was decided by the Supreme Court in Shaw v. Vino. And this was a case argued in 1993 where there was a 5-4 majority for racial gerrymandering, where we saw 5-4 against racial gerrymandering, I mean. And that was decided by Chief Justice Rehnquist, Justice O'Connor, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas. Now, if this were the present day, it would be likely that the more future constitutionalist judges, like Justice White, Blackmun, Stevens, and Souter, they would all also go for Shaw. But back then, racial gerrymandering was sort of a thing that was being discovered by a lot of people, a lot of regular people, and as a result, it was more of an emergent idea compared to today, where racial gerrymandering is a lot more prevalent, or a lot more widely known, I should say, than before. So anyway, in this, they ruled that this violated the 14th Amendment under the Equal Protection Clause, which stated that you can't discriminate based on race. And as a result, North Carolina had to draw a new map. So that's how this map came to be, where we see that the districts are more contiguous, and you can see that the 12th district is still favoring minorities, but it's not in a way with racial intent as to try to gerrymander the map for political gain. So, I mean, the Supreme Court decided that it seemed to exceed what was reasonably necessary to avoid racial imbalances. It went past what was required of the VRA to the point where it was more towards political gain rather than trying to get a black House of Representative member to Congress. And that's been the standard ruling we've seen today with gerrymandering. Gerrymandering has actually not really gone to the Supreme Court that many times. It's more of a state Supreme Court issue rather than a federal Supreme Court issue. But still today, race heavily impacts how maps are drawn, because race can decide if a black politician or a black constituent gets into Congress, or an Asian constituent gets into Congress, or a Latino gets into Congress. So it's very that's kind of how people purposefully draw maps in order for that purpose. That's why you see a lot of weird maps. It's not always because of partisan gerrymandering, but it might be because instead that a party might want a black member in Congress or a minority member in Congress. And an example of this is Alabama's Alabama's 7th district. You can see here that it looks very weird. It goes through Birmingham and Montgomery, which are pretty democratic places, and then it goes through this area right here. But if we align this with the county population, or at least the list of the amount of African Americans per county, you can see that in terms of the African Americans count in Alabama, it pretty well matches with Alabama's 7th district. You can see it goes through Montgomery, it goes through Birmingham, and it goes through this area of farmland where a lot of black Americans live. And that was there to satisfy the VRA, the Voting Rights Act, which dictated that you should have minority districts so that minorities can be elected into Congress. Another example, Mississippi's 2nd district, where you see that there are a lot of black Americans along the Mississippi River, and that correlates with this district right here. And the purpose of this, again, is to have minority voice in Congress. And Democrats are well aware of that, Republicans are well aware of that, and Democrats are trying to use that argument today in order to get more districts for them. This is a very political thing, so obviously Democrats and Republicans are going to try to use the VRA to their best defense. You can see here in Alabama that Democrats are going to try to get another VRA district implemented so that a second black member can be elected into Congress, with Alabama's 2nd district, being another black majority district. And you can see that this new map also correlates with the black American share population share. As you can see, the 2nd district goes through right here in the lower area of Alabama, while the 7th district continues to have this area, which has high population count of black Americans. And you can see that this the VRA has mainly been done in the South, where there are more black Americans, but it's also been done in other places where there are other minority groups. You can see here that in New York, if we go over to New York's 6th district, I believe, where Grace Meng represents the district. You can see here that it mainly has Flushing. You can see Flushing is entirely inside New York's 6th district, and that was somewhat on purpose because there are a lot of Asian voters here and Asian American voters. They are the purpose of this district is to elect an Asian member to Congress, which is how Grace Meng was able to win in New York's 6th district. And this really is meant to help dictate policies and representation in the House of Representatives, where if you have more Black Americans or if you have more Black Americans, Asian Americans, and more minorities in Congress, then you have different voices that is meant to enrich the overall policy making process. And that's how redistricting can actually it can actually influence policy. We've seen here already through in a different video how partisan gerrymandering makes a Congress more divided, makes a more polarized Congress, and as a result leads to more progressive and more conservative kinds of bills rather than in-between bills that attempts to do some sort of compromise. Now we see here that how using the VRA and as well as using race to dictate redistricting, it can heavily influence how policies are made in a racial standpoint, how it may promote racial justice issues that might not have been talked as much about if a lot of these members in Congress were white. So those are two ways how drawing maps, how redistricting impacts the way we get policy making done, and it affects also the way that how elections work. So it's just a couple of many ways, and there are a bunch of other examples of the VRA being used to get a Black majority a district or a minority majority district, especially in more urban states like New York as well as Texas. But that's just one other way how redistricting is very impactful. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.